World Regions Geography 110, East Asia, Part 5. We're in Cultural Practices, Social Differences, and Identity. So some of you may be familiar with what the Cultural Revolution was. It was in the late 60s. It was basically a conflict between the rural, uneducated, common people in China versus urban, more educated people, and it ended with the death of Mao in 76. Mao was the instigator of the Cultural Revolution, and basically what they did was the Red Guard, this young group of people, were supposed to instill the virtues of the revolution. So they went into the cities and they just like they went into the universities, they rounded up all the students, they marched them out into the countryside, and they put them to work uh, in the rice fields or in agriculture. Um, and they didn't get a lot of food. I knew one person that had gone through that. She was a year into her PhD program when she was taken out and marched out in there and was out in the rural area for like 3 years before she got back and was able to finish her degree. So it was a very difficult time for her, a lot of very bad memories. What you see after Mao's death is the reemergence of Chinese culture. So you have the reemergence of social order, you have the reemergence of the importance of culture and art. Basically, the Cultural Revolution wanted to destroy all that connection to ancient China and focus strictly on the revolution, and that ended. Now, there's a lot of gender issues in Asia. Asian cultures typically have a highly hierarchical system of gender roles. They're male dominated, which manifests themselves in all societies in East Asia. Um, Things like, particularly among the elites in earlier times, prior to the Communist Revolution, there were things called like foot binding. And foot binding was a practice where wealthier women would have their feet bound at an early age and the toes bent under so that they would have small feet, which made it difficult for them to walk, often breaking the bones in their foot. Um, this is where you get the concept of high heels, form-fitting dresses, um, a lot of the policies with makeup, the ideas of makeup came out of China in the 19th century primarily, 18th and 19th centuries. These were all from this male-dominated society and the perfect woman sort of thing. Currently, China's one-child policy, which was instituted in the 80s, and has recently been uh, loosened. But the policy has had some pretty severe impacts. We'll actually talk about them more later. But one child, and what this has resulted in is that female infanticide, which means killing of females. Because of the male dominated society, families wanted to have a son, and therefore, if they had a female, they might kill her or they might just give the child away. But often it ended up with the child dead, so that way they would be allowed to have another child and they could try again for a male. This has some pretty serious impacts long term for China, and we're going to actually go into that a little bit more in depth later. But I think it's something that bears mentioning at this point. Ethnicity and ethnic conflict in China. A lot of times, Westerners and Americans in particular, we look at China, we think it's this homogenous group. It's this group, everybody's the same. They're all Chinese, right? No. Extremely diverse groups, as you see right here. Lots and lots of ethnicities, and most of these groups are on the outside looking in. The Han Chinese, which make up about 91% of all Chinese, and this is the other 9%. Pretty seriously, these are isolated in rural and outlying areas out of the central core, so they're not participating in the economic rewards, and that tends to lead traditionally in Chinese society to political unrest. Ethnic tensions are most severe on the fringes. In other words, in the west, in Tibet, around the edges of the country, whether it's the north or the south or the western part. Tibet, of course, a lot of ethnic tension there. Muslim regions in the west, a lot of ethnic tension. You don't really hear about it. The Chinese suppress news coming out of that region, but there's been a lot of activity with Chinese troops in there, suppressing dissident groups. Fringe regions in the southwest mountains. That's where Miaos are and some of the other groups. They're along that southwest mountain. And then in northern Manchuria, a lot of groups, and along Mongolia, Inner Mongolia region, you have a lot of groups that are marginalized also. The demography and urbanization. This is where you can look right here. You can see where the concentration of the population is. This portion. That's that, if you remember, that's that continental margin. And this area right in here where it's darkest is the densest population, but it's also the most susceptible to global warming. Most of this area here would be submerged in the event of global warming. A moderate sea level rise will submerge most of this region right here. You can see in this region here, this is the Tibetan Plain, western portions, Mongolia here, not much in the way of population. This region in here, not much. And when we look at economic development and the distribution of wealth, you're also going to see these regions are the ones that are not getting a fair shake on it. Demographic change. Now, this is important because you see three different countries: Mongolia, China, and Japan. When you look here, and you look right here, this group in here, you see how few men there are compared to women? That's the World War II generation in Japan. They were decimated. The men were decimated compared to the women. You see this down here, the baby boomer generation. These were post-World War II generation right there. A little slip. This is their children about 20 years down. And then you're seeing a steady decline. It's estimated by 2050 that Japan's population will drop by about 20 to 30%. What that means is that spills over to the economy. So you're going to have a lot less consumption. The economy is going to shrink, and it's going to have long-term impacts for the country in terms of wealth and the ability to maintain its position as a dominant economy. Now you look at China here. Again, this is right after the war. This is actually the end of the communist revolution. So these are some of the first 1949, 1950, right in there. Actually right here to right there. You see this, there was peace. Now the population kind of boomed, went out. This is about 20 years later. So this is the beginning of the 60s. And the Cultural Revolution right in there. Then you have a little boom in the population, and then the one-child policy went into effect, and you see this dramatic drop in the population. What you can't see here, is you can't really tell the amount of difference in male and female here. You can kind of see a little bit 3 versus, females 2.5. This is 0.5% is a lot, 4-year tranche. And you look at Mongolia, the economy was slower, health, the health was an issue. You see the population boom out about 25, 30 years ago, and then a small drop, and now you're having a second. That's these people having children. But you can see this population is slightly bigger, but a lot fewer females. This economy will continue to grow. These two economies are going to shrink. China, it's estimated by 2050, and maybe even as soon as 2030, will be a net importer of labor. It's kind of hard to imagine, but it's true. China's one-child policy, uneven ratio of male-female. You see here, this is a projection of Chinese population growth, and that's the peak, 1980, and it begins to drop off. Here is a look at the male-female population. This is a normal ratio. You typically have a few more boys than girls, but when you look at the Chinese ratio, it's way out of whack, and that's because of female infanticide. Here's the Chinese total fertility, and this is a steady drop. And why that's important is because long term, it's going to mean a decrease in the population. And that decrease in the population is going to make for a shrinking economy.